It looks like at the beginning meaning March and April, that El Nino is going to come on steady but slowly, not terribly strong, but kind of getting a cattle prod at the end of summer.
It's the million-dollar question. When and at what speed could we see an El Nino develop through the remainder of 2026? Well, today, meteorologist Don Day joins us as we look at our extended weather outlook for the year. We'll walk through what it looks like across the country from the remainder of this winter into spring and then into those critical summer months that hinge on how much monsoon moisture actually materializes.
For the monsoon season right now, I'm encouraged that it will be robust.
A robust monsoon, a building El Nino, but timing is everything. Plus, we're also going to be talking cattle technology that we saw at the cattle convention that measures feed intake, fertility, and efficiency in real time through a wearable device. And the Captain Tim O'Byrne will also be in as he shares his conversation on why China remains the wild card in U.S. beef exports and what that could mean for prices moving forward. That's coming up on today's edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show. We do have a lot to get through here on today's program, and we're glad to have you with us. Hi, everyone. Justin Mills here, host of the Working Ranch Radio Show. And if by chance you're out feeding today, you're in the pickup doing something, you have to jump out, cut some net wrap or bell strings or open a gate, whatever that might be, you can find all of our shows by going to our podcast site at workingranchladio.com. However, I do know folks have their own preferred podcast providers. You can find us there as well. And you know what's also helpful? Leave us a comment, a rating, or a review. That not only helps us, but it also helps other folks that might be listening or wanting to find a show that is relevant to the ranching industry. Do that for us. We would sure appreciate that. By the way, if you haven't had an opportunity to listen to some of our more current shows that we've had, well, I'll tell you what, we've had some great ones. Last week, Clint Berry joined us as we were doing the 2026 Cattle Market Outlook. The show before that, Kenny Burdine with the University of Kentucky. The title of that show was Are Big Cows Paying Their Way? Well, that was a great show. And then also, back in the end of January, John Maddox with Maddox Cattle Company joined us. The title of that show was When Emotion Meets Discipline, as we talked about how he has managed Maddox Cattle Company over the years, a multi-generational ranch that homesteaded there in Nebraska, how they've evolved over that and how they've developed their cattle program there. And I'll tell you what, just a great conversation, not just armchair quarterbacking concepts, but things that he has put into place. A very great show that I encourage you to go and listen to. And by the way, speaking of Maddox Cattle Company, they have their maternalizer mature bred cow herd dispersion sale that's coming up. That sale's coming up here quick. That's going to be on the 7th of March. If you want to go to their website at maddoxcattle.com and you can find more information about that. Again, that sale will be on the 7th of March. John is telling us about 3,000 head of home-raised maternalizer bred females. And if you want to know what that means on the maternalizer bred females, go back and listen to that show, because part of that show we talk about how they have developed their cattle. And I'll tell you what, these are a set of cattle that you can take anywhere across the country and they're going to work for you. So check out that show that we did with John Maddox. And also, if you want to find out more about their sale, go to their website at maddoxcattle.com. Hey, the latest issue of Working Ranch magazine is out. It is the March edition, as always, full of a lot of great stories and articles that are, man, if you're in the ranching business, this is one publication that you do want to get. If you want to get your subscription started, you can go to workingranchmag.com, or you can stop by any Tractor Supply store and pick one up off the shelf as well. Don't forget to stay with us later in the show. As you heard there in the opening, the Captain Tim O'Byrne will be in as we're going to be talking the export market. Also, I have an interview we're going to share with you regarding some technology that we saw down at the Cattle Industry Convention. So a lot to get to on today's program. Well, today's long-range weather brought to you by Long Range Epinemetic ivermectin with 150 days of parasite protection in just one single dose. To find out more, their website is longrangedewormer.com. And joining us now is meteorologist Don Day. And Don, as we begin our look at our 2026 weather outlook and find ourselves on the latter half of the winter, it's definitely been a tale of two sides of things. You know, the east half of the country has really seen severe weather, the west half not as much. However, right currently as we go, that is starting to change a little bit. But before we look too far ahead, let's kind of recap a little bit of where 2026, the start of the year, started with the winter months.
Yeah, it's been a very interesting winter, and part of the winter's been dominated by a lot of what we call the polar vortex. There's been several episodes of Arctic intrusions into the nation. In fact, we've had probably 4 or 5 this winter, and a lot of times we'll go through winter with only 1 or 2. But what's been interesting about this winter is that the polar vortex has been picking on the north central and the Great Lakes and the eastern side of the country the most. And if you ask anybody from Florida to Maine, from Michigan to Pennsylvania, they'll say, wow, it's been a really snowy, cold winter. If you were to talk to somebody in Nebraska or South Dakota or Colorado or Kansas or Utah, they'd say, we haven't had any winter. It's really been the tale of two different sides of the country.
Yeah, for sure. So as we finish out the end of this winter months, we've got a little bit left before we start hitting into spring. I know it's interesting for the folks that haven't had as much winter. Definitely it's been the areas of the west half of the country. There's always a little concern with whether or not we'll see that the snow in those mountains that do affect later on in the year. In fact, I was talking to somebody the other day and they were saying just the snowpack in some areas is not there. There's real concern of what that looks like. Is there any hope that that's going to get built back up as we finish out this winter?
Yeah, it's a big concern. And what we've seen this winter in the western snowpack areas in 1981. So we're talking about going back very far to see snowpack levels this low. Now, is there help? Could the snowpacks turn around and make a comeback? Well, the answer is yes, because we really have about 6 weeks left where we can build up snowpack, but we're so far into a hole that the snowpack, especially in the central and the southern Rockies, is going to end up being one of the lowest in at least the last 20 or 30 years. I do see some help. So I do think that there's going to be a little bit of a comeback, but it's going to be a season of a low runoff in many areas.
Mm-hmm. So when we look ahead into this coming year, I know there's a lot of folks that have already started calving, a few more left to go out. And I know a lot of folks looking and thinking about, okay, what's my calving season going to look like? As you look ahead into the spring of the year and later into summer, let's begin working out into the coming months, into the spring months.
Sure. What's interesting from the trends that we're seeing as we get to the tail end of winter is that the patterns that establish the cold in the east and the warmth in the west is slowly beginning to fade away. And if we see that trend continuing as we get into the months of March and April in particular, what we are likely going to see is that the central and western United States might start to get a bit more stormy. Now, this is the double-edged sword. The double-edged sword is, well, if it gets more stormy in the central and western United States during those months, that's going to increase the chance of some really badly needed precipitation. You look at the drought monitor, and we've got a lot of areas in the central western plains and the Rockies with drought conditions in place. The other edge of the sword, though, is, as you brought up, well, that may run into some folks' calving operations to where sometimes those storms in March and April can certainly be badly timed. And I do see the possibility of some spring storms. So stock growers in their calving operations are going to need to stay on their toes.
Okay. So as you begin to long-term this and put this out, I know that whenever we talk long-term, as I said a moment ago, we start talking about, well, what's the water temperatures looking like in the Pacific? How's that affecting? You had mentioned a while back that we pretty much see La Nina gone. It's non-existent. So the next phase in this, where do you see the temperature in the Pacific starting to take shape and having some effect as we look further out?
Well, one difference as we go into spring and summer of 26 compared to 2025 is that a year ago at this time, we were seeing La Nina coming on. It was gathering strength and reached its peak strength into March. And that kind of delayed the onset of spring precipitation. This year, it's the opposite. La Nina reached its peak in December and has been weakening since, and has now gone to a neutral status. And it's looking like, all indications suggest, that the sea surface temperatures along the equator in the Pacific are going to be warming as we go into spring and summer. When we've seen that in the past, where we go from La Nina to maybe, let's say by summer or late summer, early fall, an El Nino, well, that tends to mean a busier spring in terms of storms and precipitation, really across a lot of the nation. Mm-hmm. So I mentioned that cattle producers need to be on their toes for some spring storms. That's all part of the equation. So we are probably going to see a much more active March and April than we did in 2025 as we look ahead into the spring of 26.
Okay, so Don, is there specific areas where you would see it being a little more active than not? Because I know when you look at some of these maps, there's definitely some holes in some of this. There's definitely areas that are more probable, but what are you seeing?
Well, what I'm going to see is as we go into spring is a pattern that's going to be good for California, and it's going to be good for the Great Basin and the Central and Northern Rockies. And also we'll throw in part of the Northern Plains. Those are the areas that I think are going to benefit the most from increased spring precipitation. Where I have concern is going to be more along, I'll throw in some interstates, along and south of 70 and along 40 in the Southern Plains, Southern Rockies, and into the Central Plains. I think their better precipitation with this changing pattern in the Pacific may come a little bit later. It may be more towards that May and June time frame. I do think that once they get into that June time frame and July, they'll start to see moisture coming back. But it looks like a bias this spring, more focused on the north central, the northwest U.S. I do think that all of the lower 48 is going to have plenty of spring weather to deal with. But the areas that are dry right now in parts of the south and the south central and the southwest is an area that I likely will stay dry into those beginning spring months.
Okay. All right. Let's take a break here. When we come back, I want to jump in and talk a little further out. Let's talk about the summer months a little bit. And then later on, I want to get into kind of maybe going a little bit more region by region. I know you hit a bit on that, but let's do our summer months when we come back. All right?
Sounds good.
Calving season is a favorite time of year, but along with that special time are dangers, extra stress, and increased labor. Safety Zone calf catchers are all about safety and making processing new calves easier. Designed for ATVs or UTVs, one person can do the job and never be threatened by the protective mother cow. Make this and every calving season safer and easier with a Safety Zone calf catcher. Watch videos and customer testimonials or order yours today at safetyzonecalfcatchers.com or call 877-505-0914. Affordable and made in the USA. Make your upcoming and all future calving seasons safer, easier, and stress-free. Durable and designed to work anywhere you can drive your ATV or UTV. Order online at safetyzonecalfcatchers.com or call 877-505-0914 today.
Are you disappointed with weaning weight gains that don't seem to keep up with the increase in bull prices? Try capitalizing on the muscle, growth, and efficiency of Limousine and Limflex hybrids. Whether you sell calves at weaning or retain ownership through the feed yard, the extra muscling and performance of Limousine cross calves will add pounds to your pay weight and dollars to your bottom line. In fact, genetic trends for weaning weight EPDs in Limousine cattle document an increase of nearly 25 pounds over the last 10 years. Limousine and Limflex deliver dollars to your bottom line. Limousine today, profit tomorrow.
Okay, Don, you give us an idea of kind of where this spring weather is going to look. Let's now move into the summer months. And what are you seeing there? And again, the areas that, could be probable, your concern areas as you look ahead.
Well, as we get into the summer season, when we take a look at, let's say, the most current drought monitor, there's some areas in the eastern Corn Belt that are very dry. We also have some very dry areas in parts of the southeast and the south central United States. So when we're in the end of winter here, a part of the country, the eastern Corn Belt and the south central United States, that I think is looking a little bit on the dry end. We also see precipitation chances maybe a little bit lower at the beginning of spring and part of that western Corn Belt. However, I think when we get into the meat of summer, when we get into June, July, and August, especially July and early August, there are some things going on off the west coast of Mexico and in the Gulf of America to where those sea surface temperatures look pretty warm, which is really critical to feed the Midwest and Corn Belt and parts of the South with those summer thunderstorms that are so key to summer precipitation. Right now, we see a favorable pattern for that. So for the middle part of the country, I think a dry start to spring, but a slow ramping up to better precipitation into spring and summer. And there's nothing that is jumping out that says Midwest drought or Corn Belt drought. We don't see any signs of that, partly because we see La Nina going away, but we also see El Nino kind of coming on slowly. So I do think there'll be some concerns at the beginning of the growing season with some eastern Corn Belt dryness and dryness in the south, but I'm fairly optimistic that by mid to late summer, those areas will start to get back into more normal precipitation.
Okay, so for the mountain areas and maybe just on the other side of that continental divide, of course, I know we're kind of talking two different weather patterns when we talk west and east continental divide, but down the mountain spine there, what do you anticipate in these summer months as well? Because I'm kind of feeling like we're going to see maybe a little drier July than we did last year. And when I say July, I'm kind of meaning that's kind of the square middle of the summer.
Well, yeah. So a lot of precipitation that falls in the month of July is going to be derived not from storms or fronts coming from the Pacific, but subtropical moisture that naturally works its way out of Mexico and the Gulf and into the U.S. to help feed those afternoon and evening thunderstorms. So a lot of July's precipitation is relying on that. It's also relying on whether or not it's been a wet spring. And that's why the spring months, especially March, April, and May, are really critical to help fuel the soil moisture that we can see better precipitation in July. Because if we go into July with low soil moisture in parts of the country, that does affect July precipitation. And that's why we harp all the time on those spring months as being so critical. If those spring months can come through like we think they will, with at least many areas looking at average precipitation, I think wherever you live, if your spring has normal or above precipitation, there's a good likelihood that your July and August will be somewhat similar.
Okay. So along those same lines, as you said, it kind of depends on what's coming up from the south. Talk a little bit about what you envision from the monsoon season.
Well, the monsoon season right now, I'm encouraged that it will be robust. And the reasons are, number one, a lot of it has to do with how the winter season has gone. And warmer winter, that allows the monsoon to get started a little bit earlier because the water temperatures off the coast of Mexico, on both sides of Mexico, if they're a little bit warmer earlier, that gets the monsoon going in June. And then as it expands and matures, it spreads more north into July and early August. It's been a mild winter in that part of the country. It's been a mild winter in Mexico. Sea surface temperature anomalies are where they need to be. So the monsoon season has some potential, but one element of the monsoon that's really critical to keep in mind is it all relies on its northern extent, how far north it goes, based on upper level wind patterns that are coming out of Canada. You can have a wonderful monsoon that only reaches Arizona, New Mexico, and let's say southern Colorado, and some years it doesn't get any further north than that. Some years it'll go all the way up to Interstate 90 into the northern plains. So we have the ingredients for a good monsoon. The question marks will be how far north is it going to be able to go?
Yeah. Okay, let's take a quick break here. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about El Nino and what you anticipate as that hits. We don't necessarily know. You'd mentioned a bit ago that you see it potentially being slow coming in. And so I want to talk a little bit and kind of thread that out a little bit more if we can.
Imagine keeping your cattle exactly where you want them, while being able to tap into insights powered by a collar and an app. No Fence is the world's first virtual fencing system for grazing livestock. From the palm of your hand and delivered with GPS technology, you can set and move pasture boundaries, gain insight into grazing patterns, receive reduced animal activity alerts, and more. No wires, no posts, just empowered grazing that supports healthier land and your herd goals. 10,000 plus producers globally already trust No Fence. Explore the possibilities at nofence.com.
Capitalize on crossbreeding with Gelbvieh and Balancer bulls. Raise replacement females with added fertility, increased longevity, and greater productivity. Gelbvieh and Balancer influence females wean more pounds of calf per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer influenced cattle offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and have excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. This year, make your crossbreeding count with Gelbvieh and Balancer genetics.
Okay, Don, one of the things I want to get to now is how quick do you anticipate El Nino coming back in? Because I think the factor of when that happens also plays in how its effect is across the country. So what do you see with El Nino and the timing of that potentially happening?
Okay, that's a great question. That's really the million-dollar question, I think, as we go deeper into 2026. Just as a reminder to folks, when we talk about El Nino, it means that the water temperatures near the equator between South America and Indonesia and northeast of Australia are a bit warmer by a half degree to 2 degrees or so Celsius. And why is that important? Well, number one is when it's warmer, the water's warmer, the water releases more water vapor into the air. If there's more water vapor in the air upstream from North America, that just brings more water into the west, really all of the U.S., especially the west and the southern parts of the U.S. Also, another thing that happens is that the trade winds, the winds above the ocean during an El Nino, they go west to east. So just imagine the winds across the waters near the equator going from Asia, pushing towards North America and South America. That's important because it takes that extra water vapor and pushes it into the Western Hemisphere for our part of the world. And when that happens, you have better opportunities for better rain-producing storms, just better opportunities for precipitation in many areas. La Nina is the reverse. The wind direction goes the opposite way, and you don't have that pushing of moisture towards the continents. So when we look at this rest of the spring-summer forecast, with La Nina now gone and going to neutral status, it looks like at the beginning meaning March and April, that El Nino is going to come on steady but slowly, not terribly strong, but kind of getting a cattle prod at the end of summer, which would be we would get to, let's say, July or August, and we may have a moderately or weak El Nino in place. What we have found is most important is that the timing and the intensity of La Nina and El Nino is really important. If we have an El Nino coming on in the spring into early summer, that usually bodes well for summer precipitation and spring precipitation. If it were to come on very quickly and, let's say, with more intensity, what that tends to do is concentrate the better rain in the southern states, the southeastern United States, and sometimes if you get too strong of an El Nino, you can actually have a drought signal in the Dakotas and across south central areas of Canada, eastern Montana, those areas. So it's kind of a situation where you want an El Nino, but you don't want a really strong one. You kind of want a Goldilocks one. And so that's why I warn people is there's no such thing as just one El Nino or one La Nina. They're all a little bit different. But right now, at least our modeling that we use to try to predict the onset of El Nino is that we're getting strong indications that by the end of summer, it will technically be an El Nino, but it may not be that until the end of summer, heading on into fall. And then it's a whole different ball game as we go into the fall and in the following winter season. So that's why I'm somewhat optimistic that some very dry parts of the U.S., especially in parts of the central and the western parts of the United States, have an opportunity to maybe right the ship a little bit.
Okay. All right. Now, you've kind of done a pretty good job here, and I don't want to necessarily go back over some things that we've already done, but maybe just real quickly, if we can, let's just kind of move through the country, start in the Northwest, and we'll move from there.
Okay. In the Pacific Northwest, and this would include Central and Northern California, Washington, Oregon, and then into Idaho, and then to northwest areas of Montana. I'm expecting that that part of the country is likely going to have maybe a bit of a drier and warmer spring and summer season. I don't necessarily think we're talking drought, but with the coming on of those warmer water temperatures, the better precipitation will be directed a little more south.
Okay, let's talk about the South. Let's move down into California and maybe into the Four Corners area of the country, a little bit into there.
Okay, that's one part of the country that I am concerned that the early part of spring may be a bit on the dry side. But if we do have a good monsoon season, which it looks like we're going to, they're going to get help in June and July and maybe August. So for that part of the country, dry to start, wet to finish.
Okay, let's get back up to the northern tier, west of the Continental Divide, into Montana, North Dakota, and down through that country.
That is going to be kind of an extension of what's going on in the Pacific Northwest, where we're likely going to be a little bit drier than normal, maybe a little bit warmer than normal for the summer season. If we do get that El Nino coming on too fast, too strong, I would be concerned about those areas being warmer and drier. So folks up there need to monitor the El Nino status as we go into summer.
How far south do we need to be watching that? Like if we dropped into the other mountain states of Wyoming, Colorado, and into those areas?
Well, those are locations that are less susceptible to a stronger El Nino being warmer and drier. So those locations, I think, are headed towards average. If the spring can be average or a little bit better, and that monsoon season, which looks robust, comes together, then for the Central Rockies and the Central Plains, I think we're going to deviate towards pretty seasonal conditions for the summer season.
Okay, let's hit the Corn Belt, and you can just include both the northern and the center eastern Corn Belt in that.
So the Corn Belt, as we mentioned, the eastern Corn Belt is starting off dry, and it was pretty dry for a good part of the winter in the Northwest Corn Belt. I do think that the Corn Belt overall is not headed towards a drought this summer, but I do have some concerns in those eastern and southeastern areas of the Corn Belt being a little bit drier.
Okay, let's get into the Southern Plains. You kind of mentioned it just a little bit ago, but when we get into the Southern Plains of Oklahoma, Texas, maybe part of Kansas and in that country, what do you anticipate there?
Those areas I'm concerned about dryness in the spring, at least early spring. I do think that there's going to be the dryness that they've had for a lot of the winter season is going to probably continue into March. The Southern Plains and part of the southeastern United States, kind of an extension of those two areas, do benefit from an El Nino coming on because we tend to see an uptick in precipitation that is into those southern areas. But like some other areas I've mentioned, it may start dry but end wetter.
Okay. All right. Well, let's kind of wrap up with the southeast part of the country. And I know that's a big portion, but let's hit where you anticipate them.
So starting off dry, in fact, there's even with the snow in parts of Florida this winter and the deep south getting into those snow and ice storms, those areas are a bit on the dry side as well going into the beginning of the spring season. I do think that we're probably likely going to have a hurricane and tropical storm season that will be slightly below average. So I'm a little bit concerned about those southeastern states having a bit of a drier summer.
Okay. Well, we did a really quick round across the country. Now, I do realize I kind of left out folks in the Northeast, and I didn't mean to do that. But I also know from a weather standpoint, some of the severity of drought type situations as far as in those areas. So, Don, just some final comments.
When we look at the summer season coming up, if there's a couple of concerns I would have, I call them failure modes. Like, of all the seasonal forecasts that we just talked about, what could upend them to make them go off the rails? One is that we see the El Nino come on faster than anticipated. Conversely, if all of a sudden the sea surface temperature anomalies reverse to La Nina, both of those things would kind of blow up the forecast. So as we go into these seasons coming up, I recommend folks really stay on top of those things and watch things. If we slowly ease our way into El Nino, those forecasts that I just laid out for you, I'm fairly confident will end up being, at least have a good chance of being somewhat correct.
Okay. All right. Well, Don, as always, this is one of the shows I get requested for. People say, well, hey, when are we going to have the weather outlook? So thank you for taking the time to do that. I know you're on the road here today and you're out and about, so appreciate you taking the time to do it.
Thanks for having me.
And again, that was meteorologist Don Day as we take a look at our extended weather outlook for 2026. If you want to follow along each and every day to his weather forecast, you can find his link to his YouTube channel at dayweather.com. Or if you're a regular and avid user of YouTube, you can search on YouTube and find his channel from there. Today's Long Range Extended Weather Outlook program brought to you by Long Range Epronamectin with 150 days of parasite protection in just one single dose. Long-range epronamectin helping your herd graze and gain weight without the extra parasite protection. To find out more, you can go to their website at longrangedewormer.com. Well, stay with us. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the new technology that we saw at the 2026 Cattle Industry Convention. Stick around as I share one of those conversations coming up next.
Fascinated by our wild weather? Now you can learn, appreciate, and understand the weather in your own backyard with the new Tropo Rain Gauge. Having achieved the highest rating of any product reviewed by the weatherstationexperts.com, the Tropo boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit measurerain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to measurerain.com.
Well, as I said at the top of our program here today, starting today and in upcoming episodes here of the Working Ranch Radio Show, I'd begin sharing with you some of the conversations that I had from the trade show floor of the 2026 Cattle Industry Convention. Now, definitely the products or the services that had a lot of interest were those that were integrating some of the new technology that we've talked about here from time to time here on our program, the wearables, the remote management, whether it's land, livestock, or water, those kinds of things definitely had a lot of interest. One of those such booths was the folks at Ceres Tags, as I was able to sit down and visit with Shane White, who is the National Sales Manager for Ceres, as we talked about what their product is as a wearable device and how it integrates from a management tool for the rancher.
Ceres Tag is the world's first animal intelligence platform. So we operate as an open data platform that automates reproductive or efficiency phenotypes into management software. So we don't tell the producer what software to use. We allow them to use any one of our number of partners that are listed on our website to make better management decisions with better data. We automate unique phenotypes like pasture feed intake on grazing cows, which is a 15-year research study done by the Commonwealth Science Industry Research Organization in Australia that gives a 90% accurate dry matter intake on every grazing cow around the world without infrastructure of any kind. So we're allowing producers to understand who eats 20 pounds of intake between an 800-pound calf, who eats 30 pounds of intake between a 600-pound calf, and choose for cows that really do match our environment better. Because it's good to know what an animal does in a bunk-based scenario. It's far better to understand how our cows truly interact with their environment they live in every day. Yeah. That's when we make better decisions for who we retain, who we flush, who we rebreed, all the things that come into those decisions.
So recently at the cattle convention convention that took place, you guys unveiled Gen 6 of your technology out there. As I said before we started, kind of give me some updates of how that varied from what you had before.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. So Ceres Gen 6 allows us to automate reproductive capabilities along with the intake and the management behavior we've always automated. So we still automate grazing behavior, resting behavior, ruminating behavior down to the minute on every animal in a grazing system. But now we can also automate estrus alerts, calving alerts, and mounting scores, which are brand new revelations for how we manage cow-calf systems. It doesn't mean there's any more value in this new device for a stalker operator, but it means for the cow-calf system, it really does become a very different use case value for them.
Yeah. Shane, in this type of technology, how important is that background element that's in this technology? How important and how critical is that for the success of this?
It's super essential. We can tell you the story from the scars. Having them be truly waterproof is the biggest engineering feat you can possibly imagine, because cattle devices, any wearable technology that's not IP68 waterproof is going to have water ingress. Water is the enemy of every technology that's ever lived. So until you can make it truly waterproof, you're going to have trouble with reliability. So starting with Generation 5 and on, our devices are IP68 waterproof. You can leave them in water, pull them out, and they will start transmitting data as soon as they charge back up.
In today's day and age, it's a conversation I was having with somebody the other day about just running in an economy of scale. You know, what used to work years ago, a certain size of cattle herd operations, was maybe not as economical as it is today. And so if we're trying to ramp up, if we're trying to scale up, I think the next element of that is the utilization of technology.
100%, because we're allowing you to see the females in your herd that eat for 3 and wean for 1. And whether we like it or not, we all have cows in every herd that eat 3 times their value in the number of calves or the pounds of calf they wean for us every year. So when we start making selection pressure on those things alone and get rid of that 5 to 10% that's in every herd, we just changed your stocking rate by 20%, because I got rid of 10% inefficient cows and made you a 20% more valuable herd. 20% more calf at the end of every grazing season is a pretty easy number to pencil that I'm going to pay for a lot of devices.
Yeah. We get into the utilization of this technology really from the ranch side of things. One of the initial things you can't help but think of is being able to know when that cow is going to cycle. If we've missed when she's in estrus cycle, so that we are giving ourselves a better chance of having more bred cows. And the value of these calves, but in any calf market, a bred cow is worth her weight compared to an open cow.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So being able to automate the days between calving and return to estrus allows us to understand fertility at our herd level. Yes, we've done some amazing work as breed associations and other research institutions to understand fertility across our cow herd. But when we as individual producers can understand the average number of days it takes our cows to return to cyclicity and manage for the ones who aren't returning fast enough, heaven forbid I have a 90-day calving season and I have some subset of my cows that don't return for 50 days. Well, I know by next year she's not going to be in the herd because she can't return fast enough next year. So I'm going to sell her as a bred cow this year and not an open cow next year, because she's more valuable to somebody else down the road. And she may very well match a ranch down the road who has better forage quality or a longer calving season. She just doesn't match my intensive management, and that's okay, because we need to understand which cows match our true environments, not take assumptions that have existed either in research or other institutional areas, but truly understand efficiency in our ranch gates to do a better job of partitioning grass into economically relevant outputs.
Yeah. Shane, as you made that comment, I couldn't help but think that I think one of the things that we're trying to manage for, there's enough variables in ranching. There's already enough variables that we can't always plan for. If there are things that we can plan for, and what I hear you know, when you're saying there, if like, man, if I can sell this cow now as a bred cow and know that, you know, I'm not just going to take a risk on her next year, that being able to make those kind of management decisions is the key to where some of this is coming back to when it comes to putting dollars back in the producer's pocket.
100%. And it becomes a really important conversation for the producer to have with his banker and all the people that are involved with his operation. Because if he's making that kind of data-driven decision, his banker should have a tremendous amount of confidence in helping him with either better terms or more favorable rates, because he's doing the best job that's possible to manage his ranch to get the most economically relevant output. Now, that might be yearling bulls, it might be bred heifers, it may be yearlings. We still need to understand, how do we better partition grass into those outputs? And if we can increase stocking rate and decrease the number of animals that are falling out for some reason we can't control, then we should use the data to make those better decisions.
Yeah. A couple of things when we talk about utilization from a rancher's perspective in this, and just some real life, I think some real practical things, I want you to talk a little bit about mounting score and what, I think we understand what that's getting at, but this is one of the things that is the applicability or the usability of the product.
Absolutely. So just knowing where your bulls are is easy enough to use a tag to know exactly where every $10,000 to $20,000 herd bull in our system is. But now knowing which one breeds cows at a score of 6 out of 7 versus a score of 2 out of 7 allows me to know, hey, do I have an old bull that's really dominant that's taking most of the breedings and I don't want him to? Or do I have a young bull that just straight up doesn't want to go get it done, and I'm going to go have a conversation with whoever I got him from? I'm not learning this at the end of next calving season when I might do parentage testing and verify whose calves are whose. No, I understand who's breeding really well in real time. I also understand if my bull that's been working really hard suddenly stops, I know he's probably injured, and I'm going to go figure out what happened, because I can intervene if I know 10 to 12 hours later. If I know 10 to 12 days later, it may be too late and I may be in trouble.
Yeah. Second thing, and you've already referenced a little bit, but about, increasing stocking rate, but it gets back to feed utilization, and talk about that aspect in this.
Yeah, absolutely. So just unlocking how much forage it takes for our cows to maintain themselves and to do a better job of generating these relevant outputs really does allow our producers to understand and action upon the efficiency of our animals to repartition grass into protein, whether that's animal protein to stay in the supply chain, or it's just repartitioning energy to get rebred, or to wean a bigger calf, or to milk a bigger calf. We get to see intake on the last 7 days, the last 30 days, and the last 60 days on every animal in our system and the individual intake. Now, I will tell producers, studying individual intake on grazing cows is a mind-numbing experience because they don't eat in a linear fashion. But when we understand 7-day, 30-day, and 60-day intake patterns and start to understand, no, these animals are trending down, either something's wrong with them or they're just not preferring the pasture we just rotated to as much as they did the last one. Those are both okay, but we need to understand, because our animals do prefer different parts of different pastures, and different animals have different intakes in different seasons. So really starting to understand those efficiencies just allows us to unlock a tremendous amount of profit that we're right now leaving in the pasture. We just allow cows who eat way too much to wean mediocre calves. Now, I may have a cow that eats 35 pounds a day that weans a $10,000 bull every other year, and I'm okay with her eating more. But if I've got one that's eating 40 pounds of intake every day and weans a dink every year, it doesn't matter. She can't justify her intake ever. Her intake may be lower than the other one, but I'm going to start really measuring that. And because we're going to open up the ability for consultants to come in and really help these producers with this, and because we're an open research platform, it allows these researchers or these consulting veterinarians or others to come in and help producers analyze this data, because they want to be able to use better data to make better decisions, but they also want to be able to use trusted advisors to make better decisions. So we have our sales team out to help them do that, and we also have a tremendous number of partners we're happy to partner them with.
Yeah. You touched on it a little bit ago when we were talking about waterproof, but if I'm going to make this an investment, I'm going to say, all right, are these things going to stay in? Are they going to work? What's the durability? What are we
100%.
talking?
So we like to joke that they're made from a bulletproof polymer, not a bullproof polymer. There is nothing that is truly bulletproof. You leave this in the ear of a bull who's in a pipe fence, he's going to do what a bull does when you take away his one job. The truth is, if you leave a $200 computer in the ear of any bull, you're making a bad decision. Now, luckily, the devices have actually lowered in cost pretty tremendously on the upfront piece. So we have a sale price anywhere from $35 to $40 per device. They're always sold in boxes of 10. So it's either $350 or $400 for the box of 10 up front. But the truth is that they have been extensively pressure tested, damage tested. We've driven over them with trucks. We've hit them with bricks. We've thrown them off buildings. We've left them in the sun for weeks. We understand what it takes to make a device function in the harsh harshest environments on earth, because these were designed to be able to chase cows anywhere from deep South Texas to central Queensland and everywhere in between. We are in 44 different species in 52 different countries around the world today. So you can count on the fact that we've seen it in a much harsher environment than these ranchers can possibly imagine. And they function anywhere from 40 below zero to 125 above zero.
All right, very good. Well, Shane, if folks are wanting more information, where would they go?
Yeah, so we would ask you to please visit cirrustag.com, or please reach out to your local distribution partner. We have I think we have just shy of 7 resale partners here in the United States today. And so those are all listed on our website, as well as all of our software platforms. So please either reach out to one of us through the info@cirrustag.com email, or directly to one of our resale partners.
All right, very good. Well, Shane, good to have you here today.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
And that was my conversation with Shane White with Cirrus Tags. And again, if you want to get more information, want to do a little more research on your own, find out about their Gen 6 that just came out, you can go to their website, cirrustag.com. Now, Cirrus is spelled CERES, tag.com is their website. If you want to get a hold and talk to somebody there, you can also find contact information by going to their website. Hey, stick around. Coming up next, the Captain Tim O'Byrne, editor of Working Ranch Magazine, checks in as he shares with us a conversation that he had recently regarding the import and the export market of our beef products.
Horn flies stressing your cattle? Make fly control one and done with Alticid IGR XRB. Alticid IGR XRB delivers season-long horn fly control from a single application bolus, providing up to 195 days of relief regardless of mineral consumption or location. It breaks the horn fly life cycle with no impact on beneficial insects, giving you flexible, consistent control. Learn more at cargillanimalnutrition.com/Alticid bolus.
As ranchers, I think it's prudent that we try to understand the best that we can facets of our industry, of our end product that we don't often deal with on a day-to-day basis. However, we do know that it does have some effect all the way back to us as producers. When we start talking about imports and exports of the beef commodity products, we're not talking live animals, but the beef products themselves, it is a topic that often comes up in conversation. Recently, the Captain Tim O'Byrne sat down and visited with Joe Shuley, who's with the U.S. Meat Export Federation, as they worked through several different topics, starting first at whether or not there's been an impact due to the tariffs.
Joe, fill us in on what the U.S. Meat Export Federation is facing lately in this whole trade effort.
Well, almost a year ago, we were introduced to a lot of new U.S. tariffs. And our first concern when that happened, when that announcement came, is would our trading partners retaliate? The good news is most of them have not. They've chosen to negotiate rather than to turn immediately to retaliation. The bad news is China has retaliated. They've shut beef out of the market. We still have very high retaliatory duties on pork. And so we're shut out of the China beef market. We're limited in what we can do in China's pork market. So from a retaliation standpoint, like I said, good news, bad news situation. It's limited to China, but China is a big hit. China a few years ago was a $2 billion market by itself for U.S. beef. That was when U.S. beef exports hit a record of almost $12 billion in a year. This year we're probably going to be around $10 billion. And for us to get back to that record level performance, we need two things to happen. We need China to be back open, and we need bigger calf crops. We need bigger supplies. We're a little tight on supply. So on the beef side, we would say demand is outstanding. It's very good in Korea and Taiwan and Japan and a lot of our Latin American markets. We still see very good demand for U.S. beef, but there's some other factors on the supply side and on the market access side that are holding us back a bit.
Where do we stand with the beef offal?
Well, we do export almost all of the edible offal off our beef animals is exported. Mexico is the largest volume destination for offal. They take a lot of tripe, lips, hearts, things like that. Egypt is our largest market for livers. That's our very liver-intensive market. And then beef tongues, you go to the higher end of the spectrum. Beef tongues, almost all of those go to Japan. That's the dominant market for our beef tongues. Those exports have held up pretty well. We're always looking for new markets for those, and I have all your eggs in one basket. So we're trying to market more livers, for example, in Peru and Colombia and South Africa and places like that to stay diversified. So we're always looking for new markets. We think that if the trade deal with Indonesia goes through, for example, that would open up some more offal opportunities there. So we're always looking to diversify, but there's still good, strong international demand for those offal products. And, on a per head basis, those can equate to about $40 to $45 per head.
The Califax update is highly optimistic, very cautious. Do you agree with that?
Well, I would say China is the big wild card. We really need to get that market reopened because we do see new opportunities in a lot of these trade deals that are in the works. We do feel like those will create new opportunities, and even in some of the established markets in Korea, for example, we'd like to finally get them to put aside all their stubborn BSE restrictions. That would help a bit. So there are all these little pieces that can help, but all of them put together are not going to replace the lost business in China. And the thing to remember is, too, that when we, if China was fully open this year, I would guess we would do about $1.6 or $1.7 billion in China if it was fully open for the entire year. And we not only lose that direct business, but having China in our mix of markets also adds a premium to everything we send to Korea, everything we send to Japan, everything we send to Taiwan. The price you can command is bumped up a little bit by having China among your portfolio of customers. And when you take all those Chinese buyers out of the market, everything you send overseas, especially to Asia, is going to be worth just a little bit less than it would have if China was open.
That makes perfect sense, Joe. Thanks so much for the update. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, Justin, and Joe went on to say after the interview that a lot of the work that they do is behind the scenes. They meet constantly with suppliers and importers of product and teach them how they can get it at a wholesale price point that they can afford and take it to their country and market that product, create something that the consumer wants to buy and sell it for a profit. And that's the whole sustainability. Keep working at it behind the scenes and keep educating these people that what we have to offer is going to be a long-term profit provider.
You bet. Well, Captain, thank you for sharing that conversation that you had with Joe Shuley, the U.S. Meat Export Federation. Some good information to understand for us as beef producers. And I think it helps us to understand where we're not in it on a day-to-day basis, what is going on, and to know that there is some complexity in this import-export. It's not just as simple as what we would like to think it is. And at the same time, understanding that there's some value being built into this when, as Joe was sharing with us, when we can take the products, the byproducts that we don't use much in the United States, ship them across the world, get a premium price on them, and that adding up to about a $40 to $45 increase in value per carcass. Some good information there that helps us understand a part of our industry we're not in on a day-to-day basis, but does affect us as ranchers. Hey, be sure to join us next week. We're going to be talking embryo technology and something new that's coming down in that space. And one of the things that, if anybody has ever messed with embryo, they know that one of the issues is that it's expensive. And part of the reason that it's expensive is the ability to get that embryo all the way to a live animal. And if those odds could be improved and the economics of that starts to be reasonable, how could that affect our cattle industry? Not just for the purebred, but also for the commercial rancher as well. That's something we're going to be exploring on next week's edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show. So be sure to tune in and listen to that show. Or if you miss it on the radio, again, you can find it on any podcast provider. Well, the Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. If you'd like to get a hold of me, you can do it simply by sending me an email at justin.workingranch workingranch@gmail.com. I'd like to hear from you. If you have an idea for a show, topic you'd like, or questions you might have, please feel free to reach out. I'm Justin Mills. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.